Hi everyone, welcome to the Whiteleyverse with me, Connor Whiteley, for another daily short story. Now, before I start today's story, please remember to like, comment and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content, and the engagement really helps the Whiteleyverse with the YouTube algorithm. Also, if you want to buy this short story and any of my other fiction, then they're available from all major ebook retailers and at your local bookstore and local library if you requested, and you can order paperback copies from Amazon. Now, here's today's short story. I hope you enjoyed just as much as I did writing it.
Christmas Eve Proposal. Are you nervous? Over the gentle background noise of famous Christmas songs playing on the local radio, Nurse James Robinson just nervously laughed as he leant against the warm, perfectly smooth nurse's desk in the accident and emergency department at Medway Hospital. James normally liked leaning against the nurse's desk, waiting for the next call to come in, talking to the receptionists, and even talking to patients waiting here when he was meant to be on his break. He just liked talking to people and making sure that patients felt better. But the waiting room with its sterile white walls, rows upon rows of blue plastic chairs, and mute TV was not relaxing or enjoyable tonight, and James just wanted everything to be calm, perfect, and he wanted it to be midnight so he could have the perfect proposal. Tonight, the very last thing James wanted was the bright red phone behind Tilly to ring. He never wanted anyone to need their help, but he really didn't need any patient to come into the emergency room tonight. That would be a disaster. Of course he was nervous, and James just couldn't believe Tilly, the receptionist with her long golden hair, slim body, and oversized blue uniform, would suggest otherwise. The thick aromas of lemons, grapefruit, and even watermelon from the brand new bleach the hospital was trialing out because it was cheap, and one of the hospital directors had a friend who worked for the new supplier. The rich, zesty aroma filled the entire waiting room, and James wasn't sure if it was nice or not. He would have preferred a mixture of cloves, mulled wine, and cinnamon, given it was Christmas Eve, but it wasn't the worst aroma in the world, and it left the great taste of fruit salad on his tongue. But he wanted it to be midnight already, and he wanted to have the perfect proposal. It was 11:41. James smiled and started bouncing up and down on the spot. In 19 minutes, he would know if sexy, beautiful, smart Roman Webb would be his husband or not, and they could be together forever. Tilly started tapping her brand new Christmas red and green bureau on the nurse desk, and James looked at her and smiled. She was probably as excited about the proposal as him, because they had all gone to nursing school together, and James and Tilly had been friends even longer. James had met Roman through Tilly, and he was always going to be grateful for that, and Tilly was just a brilliant person all round. But James was never going bowling with her again. She was too good and way too competitive for him. "Relax," Tilly said. "It's going to go perfectly." James shook his head as the radio changed to a jazzy version of Santa's Coming to Town. He couldn't deny the setting was perfect, even more so, with the red, blue, and green tinsel hanging slightly down from the edges of the ceiling. The emergency room was warm, empty, and there were no patients inside for a change. It was rare for the waiting room to be empty, but there was always 1 hour every night when it was silent. James never knew which hour it was going to be during the night shift, but there was always one single hour without failure. And he just needed this hour to last until midnight, so he could ask Roman to marry him. And it meant 1 hour where he didn't run through the ABCDE, conduct a secondary survey, or control any bleeding using tourniquets. He still hated using tourniquets because they were just a pain to use at times. "You can't be worried he isn't going to say yes," Tilly said, leaning over the desk. James rolled his eyes. "I am now. I wasn't before." James bounced up and down even more, and then he stopped and forced himself to take a deep breath of the zesty air. He really would have preferred some Christmas spice-scented bleach, but maybe he could request that for next year. "You've been through everything together," Tilly said, working on something on her computer. James nodded and smiled at Tilly. She was right. Him and Roman had been through everything together over the past 7 years and 364 days, from the stress of nursing school to helping Roman transition and become the stunning man he had always been, to the stress of becoming nurses. They had been through everything together, and James loved Roman more than anything else in the entire world. He just hoped beyond hope that Roman felt the same way about him. They had both met Christmas Eve of the first year at nursing school at 1 minute to midnight, and James and Roman had loved each other from the first time their eyes locked. James couldn't believe how lucky he was to have found the man he loved, and they had spoken every day since. Roman flat out loved Christmas, and he liked the number 8 because it was meant to be lucky in Chinese culture. Not that Roman had any connection to Chinese culture, so James wanted to propose to him exactly 8 years since they first met. It was going to be perfect and romantic and just everything Roman had ever wanted. There just couldn't be any distractions. The red phone behind Tilly rang, and James just rolled his eyes because something bad was going to happen, and possibly mess up his perfectly laid plan. Roman Webb stood in the middle of the hot, almost uncomfortably so, metal lift with Christmas songs casually playing in the background, like the radio didn't have a care in the world, as he waited to reach the emergency room. As soon as the incoming patients reached the emergency room, he was going to help run through the ABCDE with them. He needed to make sure their airways were open, their breathing was okay, remove any clothing so he could assess the injuries, and more. He had to help these people. A few pieces of red, blue, and green tinsel that someone had hung up around the edges of the lift fell down. Roman smiled. The hospital was trying to celebrate the most amazing time of the year. That's all that mattered. The hospital had just received a call about a near-fatal traffic accident a few kilometers away. One was already dead, and another 3 were being driven with potentially life-threatening injuries. Roman hated calls like this, almost as much as he hated the new zesty bleach the hospital was trying out. It was just a disgusting smell to have around Christmas time. Everything should have smelt of mixed spice and nutmeg. He was so looking forward to tomorrow, and he loved Christmas. He could see his brothers, sisters, and nephews at his parents' house, and then in the evening they would go to stunning James's parents' house for their Christmas celebrations. It was going to be such a brilliant day, filled with love, celebrations, and wonderful food. Roman could almost taste the rich Christmas pudding James's dad always made now. He certainly wouldn't be driving after having some of that. Roman couldn't bear to think about the crisis they were going to face. He was going to be helping Dr. Bella and Dr. Willow examine the patients and prepare them for surgery if needed. Tilly already would have called the on-duty surgeons. Roman just hoped beyond hope they were already here. And hopefully, they wouldn't be needed at all. The lift reached the emergency room, and Roman shot out of it. He looked at his watch, 11:44. The ambulance wouldn't be here for another 5 minutes, and there wasn't much prep to do, because he had already got everything him and the other nurses might need out at the beginning of his shift, regardless of the situation. And it was Christmas Eve. In his experience, traffic injuries were most of their workload, so it made sense to prepare for those phone calls. Roman still hated receiving them. Roman went towards the nurse desk, where Tilly was typing away at her computer. Her long golden hair moving around violently as she typed, checked a folder next to her, and looked back at the screen. She was probably getting the patient's medical records up, so the doctors and other healthcare professionals could see if the incoming patients had any allergies, pre-existing health conditions, or if they were on any medication. Roman always liked how Tilly was on the ball like that. He smiled at Dr. Willow and Bella in their white coats, and their long back hair was tied up into a tight bun. Roman never would have guessed they were sisters because Bella was the taller and slimmer one, and their personalities were very different, but Roman could see in times like this just how similar the sisters were. They were both talking, making up a plan, and briefing some of the other nurses that had already joined them. Roman didn't recognize the other nurses. They all looked the same in their blue nurse scrubs. Then Roman saw stunning James listening to Dr. Bella like she was the most important person in the world, and given the situation, she well and truly was. James looked so cute, perfect and sexy with his dirty blonde hair that was only just long enough for him to run a hand through when they showered or had sex. James looked so intelligent, caring and young in his nurse's uniform, and Roman couldn't believe how lucky he was to be sharing Christmas and the rest of his life with him. That was why he was going to propose to James at midnight. But as the ambulance arrived and everyone sprang into action, Roman seriously doubted that was going to happen. He wouldn't be getting the perfect proposal that he had always wanted, and the perfect proposal James really deserved. A few hours later, after conducting a secondary survey of the incoming patients, controlling some bleeding, and immobilizing more fractures than he wanted to admit to, James just sat down on an uncomfortable warm blue plastic chair in the small nurse kitchenette. He liked how all the bright copper, red and green tinsel he had artfully hung around the room still added such a great contrast to the sterile white walls and the overfilled blue notice board attached to one wall. The odd zesty aroma of the new bleach was a lot less intense in the kitchenette, and James was more than grateful for it. Instead, the wonderful buttery smell of mixed spice, cloves and cranberry juice filled the air. The smell of Christmas in its purest form. "Hey," Roman said coming into the kitchenette. James smiled like a schoolboy at the beautiful man he loved. He didn't care how shattered Roman looked. He was always going to look stunning, and James so badly wanted to kiss him, but he wanted to remain professional. And the perfect proposal had been ruined. James didn't really mind too much. He was always going to prefer helping patients, saving lives, and making sure they didn't have to stay too long in hospital. The traffic accident patients were all resting overnight now, except one woman who was undergoing surgery. James just wanted her to be okay. Roman pulled out a chair, and James stared into his beautiful eyes. "You look lovely," James said, grinning. Roman laughed. "No, I don't. I look like I haven't slept in days." James shrugged. "You'll always look perfect to me." As soon as James said it, he felt sad because it was so true, and Roman really was the love of his life, but the proposal had been ruined. He wasn't even sure if it was appropriate for them to get engaged and be so happy with there being a young woman in surgery, with the odds being questionable. James noticed the radio in the background started to play some slow blues version of a Christmas song he didn't exactly recognize, and maybe the time was right. Maybe this wasn't the right time, and maybe he couldn't nail it for Roman. Roman was the one that truly loved Christmas, the number 8 and him. James had already missed the perfect 8-year mark, and it felt wrong to be so happy, given what they had been dealing with for the past few hours. "Happy Christmas," Roman said, gently elbowing James. James didn't care. He leant over and kissed the beautiful man he loved, and he flat out loved the taste of his soft, smooth lips against his. "Happy Christmas, babe," James said. "Ready to drive to your parents when we get off shift?" "Oh God, I didn't plan that at all well, did I? When do we sleep after our shift? Or better question, why didn't you tell me not to book Christmas so close together after our night shift?" James stood up and stretched. "Because you love Christmas more than anything else in the world, and I didn't want to stop you from living your Christmas dream. And come on, we both forget that Christmas Eve isn't smooth sailing." James couldn't understand why Roman cocked his head and opened and closed his mouth a few times, but stood up. Roman came over to James and wrapped his arms around him. James really liked the feeling of Roman's tall, fit, warm body against him. "There is one thing I love more than Christmas, 1,000 times over actually," Roman said, grinning like a teenage boy. "I love you more than anything. If I had to get rid of Christmas or you, I would get rid of Christmas 1,000 times over." James laughed. He actually didn't doubt Roman for a second. Roman was amazing, kind, and he didn't care if this wasn't the so-called perfect moment. Every moment with Roman was perfect. So James was going to propose now. Roman flat out couldn't believe how sweet, perfect, and wonderful this moment was, with stunning James in his arms, the delightful smell of cranberry juice, cloves, and mixed spice, and all the amazing tinsel around them. And Roman was surprised that he had said he would drop Christmas over James. He had had similar conversations with so many exes over the years, and he had never gone that far with them, but James was worth it 1,000 times over. James was the man that had loved him no matter what. It was James who had helped him transition without a second thought, and it had been James that had helped him throughout nursing school no matter what. James had always been there regardless of the situation, and James was a brilliant nurse too. Roman hugged James a little tighter and really savored the warm hardness of his body against his, and Roman kissed James's head. This was the moment, and he was going to propose right now. It didn't matter that it wasn't so-called perfect, that he couldn't have proposed at the 8-year mark of them meeting, and it didn't matter that they were proposing in some kitchenette. He was getting engaged to the stunning man he loved. That was enough. It was always going to be enough. And he had always wanted to get engaged and maybe even married on Christmas Day, so this was still perfect. The radio changed to an uplifting version of Jingle Bells, and Roman broke the hug, got a small black ring box out of his pocket and went down on one side. He headbutted James. Then he realized James was also getting down on one knee, and James looked seriously puzzled. Roman had no idea what was going on. He looked down at James's shaking hands and just grinned at the dark blue ring box. Then he showed James his own box. "You were going to propose too?" Roman asked, not sure how to handle the situation. James nodded. His eyes went wet, and the rich aroma of mixed spice, cranberry juice, and cloves got even more intense. Roman forced back his own tears. He had always known that James loved him, but he had no idea James wanted to marry him and be together forever. James had never spoken about marriage, but then Roman hadn't either. He had been avoiding the subject for months, so James would be surprised when he finally asked the question. So James said, Will you marry me?" Roman laughed so hard, no sound came out because this had to be the most anticlimactic proposal ever. But it was still perfect in its own way. "Of course, I'll marry you," Roman said, opening his own ring box and pointing it towards James. "Will you marry me?" "Yes," James said, leaning forward and kissing Roman deep and passionately. And as they hugged and kissed each other, the radio kept playing more wonderful Christmas songs, and the smell of Christmas got even more intense, as this really was the most magical time of the year. Later that night, James just grinned as he leant against a red, purple, and blue tinsel-covered wall in his parents' living room. He liked seeing his nephews and nieces running around in their matching red Santa outfits that his parents had brought everyone this year. James was still refusing to wear his. He wasn't a fashion icon by any stretch of the imagination, but he had principles. That Santa red was awful. Wonderful Christmas songs were playing in the background, and James admired his father sitting on his favorite black leather armchair, a new Christmas present from his mom, in the far corner of the room, as he tried to watch some Christmas film despite the wonderful chaos around him. James grinned at the beautiful man he loved, as Roman sat on a large cream 3-seat sofa with James's brothers and sisters as they tried to help cute baby Tommy open a present. It wasn't successful at all, but James loved it anyway. Roman was wearing a beautiful white shirt, black jeans, and a tiny Santa hat, because some of the kids didn't want to wear theirs, and Roman wanted to prove he was cool. James wasn't really sure if wearing a Santa hat was cool, but he was happy. His parents loved him for it, and James was proud of Roman. He was the one person in the world that James knew he could always brighten up a Christmas. Roman really was the perfect man, and he couldn't wait to marry him next year. They would probably try for a Christmas wedding, because of Roman's love of the season. And even James had to admit Christmas was a brilliant, magical, and romantic time of year. The rich aroma of mixed spice, cloves, and warm mulled wine made the taste of Christmas form on his tongue. It was so much better than the bleach from the hospital, because those smells really were what Christmas was all about. He wasn't sure how he would be feeling after the chaos of last night, but the surgery had been a success, and everyone had done their job brilliantly. It was a success all around, but that still didn't make being a nurse in an accident and emergency department any easier. "Uncle Roman," one of the nephews shouted as Roman started tickling and teasing them, and everyone in the room laughed. James's grin only grew because that was the great thing about being a nurse. It might have been hard, difficult, and upsetting at times, but it was Christmas. A time for doing great things, helping people, and just enjoying life. And now, he was going to marry the man of his dreams. James didn't doubt he was going to be enjoying life to the fullest every single day, no matter what happened. So James went over to Roman, kissed his delightfully soft lips, and sat on his lap, the only space free, as he caught up with his brothers and sisters and tried to help poor baby Rory open his next present. How the baby had so many presents was beyond him. James was almost jealous. Life was perfect, and he might never be as obsessed or intensely into Christmas as Roman, but James couldn't deny Christmas was a wonderful time of year. And a Christmas Eve proposal was even better.
Welcome back everyone, it's me again, Connor Whiteley. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's story, because I flat out love writing, creating stories and sharing them with you. If you really enjoyed today's story, then please remember to like, comment and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content, and the engagement really helps the Whiteleyverse with the YouTube algorithms. And if you want to buy this short story or any of my other fiction, then they're available from all major ebook retailers, and you can get them from your local library if you requested, and you can order the paperback copies from Amazon, your local bookstore or local library if you request it. Lastly, if you want to support the channel on a one-off basis, then you can now buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Connor Whiteley. Also, if you know anyone who would enjoy today's story, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the channel. So, thanks for watching the Whiteleyverse, and I'll see you again soon. Have a great day, everyone.